So welcome, everyone. My name is Rich Simon. This is session number 1 of a Networker webinar, Diets and Our Demons. This webinar was inspired by a recent issue of the Networker that took a look at the dieting industry and what therapists might be able to offer on this topic. And so we're going to move into our first session very quickly. And before we do that, I just want a technical point I would like to make, and on some people's computers, this has been an issue. To get the full screen vision and to see both our guests today and myself and all our magnificence, you want to click on the full screen, the 2 overlapping rectangles right now, and that will put you in full screen mode. And you'll be able to see the slides and have the easiest viewing experience for today's conversation. So in this are the January-February Networker. We had a series of articles and some of the authors from that issue, including the article of our very thought-provoking cover story within that issue, are here to take a look at this whole question of dieting and diet failure and our cultural attitudes towards eating and how that relates to what therapists do in their practice. We have a $60 million dieting industry in this country, enormous, it's just staggering, and really very little to show for it. And so in terms of success, in terms of people being able to achieve long-term weight loss. So we're going to be examining that issue and a number of others from very different perspectives. And to start us off, we have with us Judith Matz, who is a therapist in Chicago, has dealt with eating issues and weight management issues and a range of issues related to food over the course of her career. And she wrote extremely provocative cover piece for that January issue, which is this January-February issue, which is part of the bonus reading for this series. So I'd like to welcome you here, Judith.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Well, let's just start off. So we have this huge diet industry, and by some accounts, if we're talking about long-term weight loss, we have a 98% failure rate of this extremely well-financed weight loss industry. Clearly, we're missing something. So from your viewpoint as a therapist and somebody who's specialized in dealing with these issues over the years, what's wrong here? What are we missing? Why are we getting so little for our money in this regard?
You know, it's interesting. You talk about diet failure, and as you said, the most common statistic is about 95 to 98% of people will gain it back. You know, if you think about it, if you went to your doctor and you're sick, and your doctor said, I have an antibiotic for you, there's a 5% chance it'll work, you wouldn't be too happy, you know. You might go home, try it, but let's say you don't get any better, and so you go back and you say to your doctor, hey, it didn't work, and he or she says, well, all right, I have an idea, here's another antibiotic. Let's try this one, same chance of it working. Right. Well, you'd probably go find another doctor or some other solution. Yep. But when it comes to diets, we don't do that. And, you know, I think part of the problem is that in a sense, all diets work, but only in the short term. So people see the weight come off initially, and when it comes back, whether it's a week, a month, 6 months later, they blame the failure on themselves, and doctors and family members and friends blame it on themselves. So we have a product that's being sold, and like you said, it's a $60 billion industry that's also very invested in consumers believing they're at fault.
Okay, all right. So, and here what our issue announced, and one of the things that we're investigating in the webinar is what therapists might have to offer in terms of a different way of looking at these issues. And so, part of this is this question, this kind of a definitional issue of where's the, we know we deal with eating disorders. So what's the relationship between people who are clinical practice, normal therapeutic practice, the kind of practices many people watching this have, and this issue of weight loss. What is it that we have to offer in this regard?
Sure. Well, obviously the therapists who specialize in eating disorders, we're talking about anorexia and bulimia, but what I'm talking about is something else. And when people come to us and say they have an overeating problem, they may say they're emotional eaters, compulsive eaters, binge eaters, and therapists tend to go back and forth with those terms too. Most therapists are probably trained like I am, that if you can just understand all the emotional issues underneath, the eating problem will go away. But it's more complicated than that. And when we talk about compulsive eating and binge eating, I really think of it as a degree of intensity. So compulsive eating really describes somebody who reaches for food when they're not physically hungry. Now, we all do that sometimes. Normal eaters do that too, but we're talking about a persistent pattern. And I guess I would say the biggest feature of both compulsive eating and binge eating is that the person has a sense of being out of control. When clients come to us, they may complain about their overeating, but what they're typically saying is, I need to lose weight. I'm too fat, I'm not healthy, I need to do something about it. And so they're interested in solving their compulsive eating or their binge eating in the service of losing weight. And by the way, with binge eating, that is in the current DSM under eating disorder not otherwise specified, and the criteria have to do, again, with the intensity, the rapid eating, eating when you're not hungry, eating by yourself. And in the next DSM, it will be included as an eating disorder. So I think of the compulsive eating as really a subclinical issue that affects many of our clients and many of us as therapists.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, and so one of the things that struck me about the article you wrote for us was your ability to take a step back and really frame the whole question of our relationship with food, not in a purely narrow clinical context, but this broader cultural context. So talk to us about that. What's the role that culture plays?
Right.
This relationship, this tortured relationship many of us have with food.
Right. So the cultural backdrop, when I talk about the disordered eating, the compulsive eating, I'm thinking about things like, you go out for dinner with your friends and you want dessert and you have some and you say, I was bad tonight, or that guilt that accompanies, or skipping meals or over-exercising to make up for eating, patterns that are chaotic. They're so typical in our culture, we see them as normal. And the backdrop is a culture that bombards us. You can't help it see it. You're in a drugstore, a grocery store, and all the headlines, drop 20 pounds in 10 weeks, and on and on. The TV news, the news headlines, the latest study. So we're constantly bombarded.
Celebrity cellulite. It's the tabloids seems like every issue of something that you see at the supermarket checkout counter is name who is the owner of this cellulite.
Exactly. And these poor people trying to be at the beach and they're being photographed in their bathing suits to say, look how, So again, you hear the shame that keeps coming up.
It really is holding up. It is about shame.
And so really, Rich, in that sense, that's how this issue affects all of us, because if we're not fat, we're afraid of becoming fat. We are warned constantly. And we're promised that if we're thin or if we can stay thin, we're going to be happy on this. I have just one slide here, but you see these all the time. This one is Kirstie Alley. And, we've all seen the drama of her weight gain and her weight loss. And in this one, if I can do it, anybody can. And there's something about how she can finally be happy.
This is 2000. Oh, this is so
this
sad.
One goes back.
2006.
Yeah,
so
I go back a little bit.
Yeah, but it puts it in context, doesn't it?
Well, the reason I picked that slide too, but I think we really need to be attuned to this as therapists, is what's happening right next to her is Catherine McPhee, who was a runner-up on American Idol. For anybody who watches that show or watched it back then. And after the show was over, she came out that she had bulimia and was now in treatment for it. So we have Kirstie Alley, losing weight and how great it is that she lost weight. And of course, you should do that too. Right. And then how awful this woman has bulimia, as if they're not connected. But we know that people who diet are 8 times more likely to develop an eating disorder.
So we have our supermarkets that are encouraging us to stuff ourselves with all this lovely food and all the enhancements and all of the effectiveness of 21st century marketing. And then we have our tabloids that parade before us the examples of either the perfect body or the shame of the people who have once had perfect bodies who no longer have it, or the people who are ravaged by some eating disorder.
Right, and the mixed messages. So, here's how you can have slimmer thighs, stronger abs, and then there's the chocolate cake recipes.
That's right. That's right.
Or one of my favorites is, how to lose, again, all the stuff, how to lose weight, how to look this way, how to look that way. And then the next feature story is too tough on yourself. You just can't win, right?
Right.
So even if we're not buying those magazines, they're in front of us all the time. And so that triggers dieting behavior.
Now, here's the thing that really most struck me, of the many things that struck me about your story, was that I had never come across this before. So part of it is your discussion of the physiology of dieting, and you're talking about the conclusion you came to was that, in fact, rather than helping us to lose weight, dieting can often, and in far too many cases, maybe even in most cases, it actually contributes to people gaining more weight. Now, how can that be?
Okay. So, if you think about our history in terms of evolution, it was feast or famine. And people, when we go on a diet, our bodies really have no way of knowing that we're dieting because it's the fashion of the time to be slim. Our bodies think that we're in trouble. And they think they're doing us a favor by helping us slow down our metabolism. So if you talk with somebody who's been dieting for a while, they may say, boy, I'm eating 800 calories, but I'm not losing weight anymore. Why is that? Well, your body is making the most of each and every calorie. So when somebody starts a diet, they always lose some water, and they always lose some muscle. Well, muscle is the part of our body that's physically active, and is metabolically active. It burns up calories. So when you go on a diet to lose weight, you lose some you lose some muscle. You're on it for a while, and your body starts to send out these red flags. It needs food. I mean, this is wired into us for survival. And so we'll talk about the psychological reasons that you go off a diet, but in terms of the physiological, when you go back to food, your body, you're going to eat more than your body needs, and what you're going to gain back is fat. You've lost some muscle, but now you gain back fat. So when people
stop on that point for a minute. So I'll lose some weight. Why will I gain back more weight? Fill me in there. I'm not quite sure I follow that.
You've already lost muscle,
okay, and
now you're going back to the food. Whenever there's been a period of deprivation, you're going to end up overeating. You don't regain muscle; you regain fat. The other thing that most people don't realize is that your body has gone into this high alert that says, oh my gosh, there was a famine. I didn't have enough food. What if there's another famine? And it gets more efficient at storing fat. It holds on to the fat. So the more people diet, the heavier they get over time. And that's been documented. They look at kids who diet as adolescents in high school, and kids who diet end up heavier than their non-dieting counterparts. We see this all the time. And I can't tell you how many clients come to me after, cycles and cycles of dieting, and they look back at the pictures when they first thought they were too fat and a parent put them on a diet or they started dieting, and they say, oh my gosh, if only I could be back there. And what we say is they've dieted up to their current weight. And, there's a researcher, Linda Bacon, and what she talks about is that for survival, our bodies are interested in protecting us. So we raise our set point. Our set point is where, if you're eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full, moving in a way that makes sense for you, it's kind of a 10 to 20 pound range that you just naturally fall into. And as you keep messing with that system, it's an unconscious system, but when you keep messing it through dieting and through overeating, it gets altered, and it only gets altered up. We really don't have a way to bring it back down.
Wow.
So, again, the worst way to make yourself thinner is to go on a diet. Diets make us fatter, not thinner.
and also every time we diet, we're at war with evolution. So we have all the wiring and the mechanisms of so we have our 21st century mentality and our ways of thinking about what the perfect body might be, and at the same time, here we are, and evolution is making it harder and harder for us to lose weight in the way you're describing.
Exactly. Now, the issue isn't only physiological, though. It's also psychological, and that's where the deprivation comes in. And I can't tell if my slide is up.
Let me put it up for you.
The deprivation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This study just knocked me out when you were the first person I had ever heard describe this. So those who may not have read your article, tell us about the milkshake.
Yeah, I made sure to include this for you, Rick.
All right, thank you.
I always call this the milkshake study, and it was done by a researcher at University of Toronto. And she was looking at the effects of restrictive eating. And so she told college students, she divided them into two groups. We have the dieters and the non-dieters. And she told them they were going to be testing ice cream flavors. But before the ice cream flavors, she took them and divided each of the groups into subgroups. So within the non-diet group, a third of the people were given 2 milkshakes before trying the ice cream, a third were given 1 milkshake, and a third were given no milkshakes. Same for the dieting group. Okay, and after they had whatever protocol, they were given the ice cream flavors to try. For the non-diet group, as you might expect, if they had 2 milkshakes, they ate less ice cream. Mm-hmm. If they had 1 milkshake, they had some ice cream. If they had no milkshakes, they ate more ice cream. So they were attuned to their physical hunger. Mm-hmm. The diet group had the exact opposite reaction. So if somebody had no milkshakes, they ate very little ice cream. If they had 2 milkshakes, they ate a lot of ice cream. So why is that? Well, for anybody who is listening and has dieted, you know that feeling where it's like there's an imaginary line, and once you cross it, you're restricting and you're using all this control, and once you cross that line, it's that sense of, I've blown it anyway.
Uh-huh.
So,
right.
Anything goes. And we see it all the time. So people are really good at restricting for a while. But once they cross that line, they feel like they can't stop. And what they say is, well, I'm going to be starting my diet on Monday. It's the weekend. So I might as well get it all in now. It's really an important idea because we call that diet mentality thinking. Mm-hmm. A normal eater, you're out for dinner, you eat a little too much, you feel physically uncomfortable, you're stuffed, and you say, that didn't feel good. And you just naturally wait till you're hungry again to eat. But the reverse happens for the dieter. That becomes the cue to start compulsive eating or binging.
Wow. Right. So, so the more we get alienated from the signals of hunger, satiety, and the more it is that our relationship with food begins to get complicated, and as you're saying, for some people, very large part of the population, out of control.
Yeah, sort of and we get so disconnected from our bodies. The thing with deprivation, I always use this pink elephant because it's like, if I say to you, as you're listening to this, whatever you do, don't think about a pink elephant.
Uh-huh.
You can't help it, right?
Right.
Well, that's what we're creating with diets. Don't have dessert. Don't have these, we start setting up all these forbidden foods and say, don't eat them. And, when you talk with clients about their eating, what you hear is such a preoccupation with food, constantly thinking, is this going to be a good day? Is it going to be a bad day? Should I eat this? I don't want it, but it's good for me. Oh, I'm being bad today. I'm rebelling. And on and on and on. And it takes up an inordinate amount of time and space. And, so I'll say to people, like, if you were told starting tomorrow you couldn't eat ice cream, what would you do tonight? Uh-huh. And inevitably I get the response, I'd eat it tonight, and I'd eat a lot of it, whether or not I'm hungry for it or not. That's what happens anytime somebody starts a diet or even thinks about starting a diet.
So there's this fundamental disconnect between body sensation, and mind and craving. And so how is this connected to this diet and binge cycle that seems to be a big part of what you focused on in your piece for us.
Yeah, okay. So the diet binge cycle, and this is what you'll hear clients talk about. So it's really helpful to understand how it works, because that way when somebody comes in the room and they're saying, I'm so bad, I can't stick to a diet, you have a way of explaining to them what's happening, that it's not that they have failed their diets, that diets have failed them. Diets always begin with a negative thought. Nobody ever gets up in the morning, looks in the mirror and says, boy, I look gorgeous today. I think I'll start a diet, right? You look in the mirror and you say, oh, my stomach sticks out, that I'm too fat, this is gross. I got to do something about it. I got to get in control. And so you can pick from a huge menu of diets, low carb, low fat. The list goes on. And as soon as people do, and you'll hear this from clients, they feel great. It's like I'm taking care of myself. And again, I really think that's something as therapists we have to watch. Is are we going to support that as caretaking behavior? I know our clients think they're taking care of themselves, but as we understand more and more the damage, we really have to question that.
You're talking about the earliest stage of a diet, there's a sense of accomplishment, of agency. I'm finally taking care of myself.
Right. And actually it's almost like a high, and people feel really virtuous. I'm hungry. I'm not eating. I'm in control. As if that's good. I'm hungry and I'm not eating. Yeah.
Okay.
So the diet goes on, and usually people will start to see some weight loss, and they'll feel really happy. They'll feel more confident. They're proud of themselves, and they start to get compliments from people. Wow, you look great. What are you doing? This is so wonderful. You're taking good care of yourself. But then what happens is exactly what we talked about earlier. For psychological reasons, for physiological reasons, people break out of the restraints, and when they do, they're not running for apples and carrots and salads. They're going for their forbidden foods, the chips or the candy or the cookies or whatever has been off limits. And they're now at higher risk of that weight coming back more quickly. And so the pounds come back, and now their friends, family, colleagues are silent. And I always think when I hear clients about that being just the most painful part of all of this is the shame that people start to feel, because it's so visible. It's so visible. So that's how the diet binge cycle works. And really the big question, because a lot of people will say they know diets don't work, but the big question is, so if you're not going to diet, what are you going to do instead?
Okay, what's distinctive about what you're talking about is, and there's a broad term, there's an umbrella of folks who are taking this philosophy, and the term that you use is this idea of attuned eating. So tell us about it. So how is attuned eating distinct from other approaches to dieting?
Okay. Anytime you're on a diet, or even if you don't call it a diet, Weight Watchers' big thing is it's not a diet, it's a way of living. Anytime there are external rules with the intention of weight loss, it's a diet in disguise. So diets all have external rules
as opposed to
internal cues.
Internal cues.
So what we're talking about is that, think of a baby. Babies are we're born knowing how to eat. So the baby cries, and that signals to the parent or the caretaker that he or she needs to be fed with a breast, a bottle, and she eats for a while, and then when she's satisfied, turns away. We call that demand feeding, and we trust the baby to know what she needs. But somewhere along the way, that starts to get interfered with for all kinds of reasons, and we lose that trust in ourselves, or we lose touch with the signal. So a lot of time when clients come to me, they don't even know what hunger feels like anymore. So the key...
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they're eating... if somebody's really overeating a lot, often they're not even waiting till they get the signal. Some people know when they're hungry, but they have to be ravenous in order to feel it. But what's distinctive about attuned eating is that it follows your internal physiological cues, which are very reliable. So the questions we ask with attuned eating are, do you know when you're hungry? Do you eat when you're hungry? Do you eat what you're hungry for, choosing from a wide variety of foods? And do you stop when you're full or satisfied? So in one way, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? Eat when you're hungry, stop when you're satisfied.
Yep. And so what's this notion of the hunger scale then that you've just put up? So how does that?
Yeah.
Is this relevant?
So that question of am I hungry? Boy, I would actually encourage everybody who's listening to this right now, take a moment, check in with your stomach, and ask yourself that question. Again, we're not usually encouraged to ask that. Some of us do it naturally, but when we're watching TV or we're following advice, it's always eat at this time or do it that way. So do you know when you're hungry? When I ask that question, a lot of times people will say, yeah, I know I'm hungry when I get irritable or I get a headache, it gets harder to concentrate, I get weak. Those are all signs that you've waited way too long. And so when I was saying a lot of the clients who come to me don't know when they're hungry, often that's the only way they feel the signal is when it's really that intense. Now the problem with that is when you're that hungry, you are ravenous and you'll eat anything. You know, you feel desperate. Anything will do, and you'll eat way more of it than you need. So the reason we came up with this hunger scale that we put in one of the books I wrote, the Diet Survivor's Handbook, is to help clients learn to attach words to the sensations in their bodies so that you can begin to honor those signals.
And calibrate it.
Yeah. And now, sometimes people like to attach numbers, and that's fine. You can do 1 is starving, 10 is stuffed, and sometimes clients prefer to assign a number to it. But I do think it's important to start to tell the difference between being a little bit hungry versus starving. They're really different. And you want to teach clients to start to respond to themselves when they feel somewhat hungry or hungry, that's the signal that it's time to eat. You know, I always think, I use the example, if you have young children, you don't leave the house without some Cheerios or some crackers, because you know if your kids get too hungry, they're miserable and then you're miserable. But somehow we think it's okay to let ourselves, or our clients will let themselves get that ravenous. We don't function well at that point.
And so, and the other piece of this that came up again and again as we were talking to folks as we were working on the issue about weight loss and dieting is for how many people there's this very close association between hunger and anxiety, that people literally, or in some cases almost scared to death of being hungry. So what is that something that you encounter? And if so, how do you make sense of that?
It makes me think of a client that came to me. I've seen it come up many times, but one in particular who was terrified of her hunger. And as we explored it, it really had to do with how uncomfortable hunger was when she was dieting. She wasn't deprived. I mean, it wasn't that she was poor and couldn't afford food. It wasn't that she was in some situation in the past where food wasn't literally available. But when you're on a diet, the idea is to get hungry and not eat at times. And so we developed almost like a mantra for her where she would tell herself day in and day out, I will make sure I'm comfortably fed. But, you know, if you think about it, one of the things, again, if you're trying to lose weight, hunger is your enemy because it means you have to eat. And what you want to, in a sense, rewire is welcoming hunger. Wow, it's terrific. I'm hungry. I get to eat. And what this approach does with attuned eating is it helps people calm down because there's now this reliable signal. When I'm hungry, I get to eat. Now, this is really important. If you're going to wait for hunger, you're going to have to make sure that you're going to feed yourself. You have to promise yourself that when you're hungry, you'll honor it and respond.
So part of what stood out for me about what you're doing with your clients. So when we diet, often we have an image of who we want to be and how we're going to get there, and it's very much in the head and very much a kind of a visual representation of ourselves. And part of what you're doing, it seems to me, is you're trying to help people rediscover the experience of our relationship with food. And so there's a whole part of it I found fascinating about this taking this question, really exploring in a very personal way, taking the time to ask yourself this question. What am I hungry for? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's going from this place of angst with food to this place of embracing our appetite and having a healthy relationship with food. And I don't mean eating healthy foods only per se.
Yeah, no, that's
but having
what I got a kick out of was that you're not a foodie, who has a very it has all these good and bad rules about food. But
exactly.
You tell us about it. Yeah.
Exactly. So once you're hungry, the next question is, what am I hungry for? And when people come to me, they're always shocked when I ask that. I'd love it if somebody comes to me for a consultation and they happen to be hungry. they happen to be hungry, and I can do this work with them because people are so used to what am I supposed to eat or what what's the right thing. So sometimes I'll have people start by asking the question of all the foods in the world, what exactly would feel right in my body right now. And some people can tell you right away, what they want. And again, it's really helpful as you're listening to this today. Think of a time when you were hungry and you had a craving, you knew exactly what it was, and you got it, and how great that feels. Steak and baked potatoes, and you get it, and it's so satisfying. Then think of a time when you were hungry and you tried to eat around it. I think of people who are at a party with pizza and they're being, quote, good, and so they just have salad. You're not satisfied, and you eat around it, but you might get full, but you're not satisfied. And a lot of times what I'll hear from my clients is then they go and they eat the pizza later anyway. You'd be better off just having it.
Yep.
So as you try to discern what you're hungry for, if it's not clear, I teach people to go through a list of questions. And the easiest is to ask about temperature. Do I want something hot or cold? Do I want something crunchy or mushy? Do I want something salty, spicy, or bland? Or sometimes people are more sensitive to I need some protein, or I need something lighter or heavier with some fat in it. And it takes time. It takes some practice to do it. And even for people, as an attuned eater, I still have to stop and ask myself, what am I hungry for? It requires being mindful, tuning in. But it's well worth it, because when you get exactly what you want, it's so satisfying both physically and psychologically. Now, people will worry, oh my gosh, if I just ate what I want, I would only eat, fill in the blank. I'd only eat ice cream, right? I've never seen it. I've never seen anybody who only wants cookies and cake and ice cream, but I've also never seen anybody who only wants carrots, vegetables and fruits. We like variety.
Well, it makes such sense. And I think two things occur to me. Sort of one is that I wonder how many people have ever even thought of asking themselves these very fundamental questions, because it's for many of us, I think, there's sort of an on and off switch about food, and there's something that's there, and maybe it's a convenience food, or you want to have a sense of fullness or whatever. But to really, in a sense, interview yourself briefly on what make these distinctions, and it's very sensuous to think about this. And as I'm going down this list, I'm thinking of what are the things that I really like there's a Chinese restaurant very near here, and they make a hot and sour soup. One of the most satisfying things at the end of a long day, sometimes I'm working here late, to have a bowl of hot and sour soup is one of the most deeply pleasurable experiences of getting through the day for me.
Yeah. And I love the way you're talking about it as good self-care. And if you think of the contrast between that kind of self-care, that you're having a food that's providing you, that feels so nourishing and nurturing to you, versus the diet thinking of I'm being good, I'm being bad. So this is really about taking out the judgment, giving yourself permission to eat what your body needs, and trusting yourself. And it's hard for people. When you've been on that diet, been cycle for a long time, it takes some time to build the trust. But what I really encourage people to do is just collect one experience at a time. And as an aside, one of the things people will try to do, both clients and I think therapists sometimes, is turn this into the stomach hunger diet, I call it, where the new rule is I can only eat when I'm hungry. But, if somebody's coming to you as a compulsive eater, the nature of compulsive eating is that they need to go to food sometimes when they're not physically hungry. So this is really a process that you work your way out of, and the first step is to begin to identify hunger and to collect these experiences one at a time. It's like money in the bank.
Well, and also making eating an experience again. Sort of one of the pieces in that issue was written by a frequent contributor to the magazine over the years, who's not a therapist. His name is Fred Wistow. It's called Chew Wisely.
Right.
So if you're looking into it, I think it's one of the bonus readings for this thing, where he takes us into meticulously, moment by moment, into this experience of having a real relationship with food and chewing and what happens through the different stages of the process. And he sort of rediscovers things like taste, like a tongue, like where do you taste on your tongue? And he discovers, and I really recommend people read it, because part of what he discovers is a lot of taste really takes place on the palate and not on the tongue. And where all this, it's this sort of essential experience of life. And as you say, most of us don't pay a lot of attention to it. And so part of it is, part of what you're talking about is, this question of sort of where does it end? Paying not only of I'm hungry, I'm being sensitive to this experience of satisfying the hunger, of responding to the hunger, and then so talk to us about this other end of the cycle. When do you stop?
Right. So we've talked about when to eat, when I'm hungry, what to eat, exactly what I'm hungry for, and then how much to eat really has to do with paying attention to, am I full? And again, if you listen, your body will give you that signal. Now, if there was no signal to start, there's no signal to stop. So if you start eating when you're not hungry, there's not going to be something to tell you it's time to stop, right? Okay. And so, again, this is a very gentle, compassionate approach. It's not about doing it perfectly. A lot of people who are compulsive eaters are very much into good, bad, I'm good, I'm bad, I have to be perfect. You can't do this perfectly. We're looking at good enough. We're looking at collecting experiences. So and everybody has an easier time figuring out when to start in the beginning of this, when they're hungry, than when to stop. So I just encourage people to pay attention to how they feel at the end. Going back to that hunger scale, where are they? Are they at stuffed? And, where are they actually comfortable? Maybe at somewhat full or full feels better. So you start to notice, how do I feel? And is that okay with me? And what happens over time is that people find it feels much better to be comfortable than to be stuffed. What makes it safe to stop with this approach is that the sooner you stop, the sooner you get to eat again, right? The sooner you stop, the sooner you're going to get hungry again, and as soon as you're hungry, you get to stop. You get to eat again. It makes me think about a woman I had in a workshop many years ago who followed the diet rule that you can't eat past 7 o'clock, I think it was. She couldn't. So she'd order her pizza at 6, and she'd eat the whole pizza because she wouldn't be able to eat again until the next day, right?
Sure.
But once we talked about this, and she knew that if she stopped and she got hungry again at 8 or 9 o'clock, she could still eat the pizza if that's what she was hungry for, or whatever else she was hungry for. It was safe to stop. So maybe she just needed a couple pieces. Maybe she wanted a piece later. Maybe later she got hungry and had a piece of fruit. But again, that's another nice example of where the diet mentality actually triggers overeating rather than helping us. So people start to realize, they start to see that they really mean business, that when they get hungry, they're going to feed themselves. Back to that mantra, I'm going to keep myself comfortably fed. And that makes it safe to stop. And it also makes me think about how important it is then to have food available. If you are at work and you're not going to be able to get away from your desk and there's no food available, and you get hungry, well, then what? You're going to get really uncomfortable. So I really encourage people we call it a food bag, to keep food with them in the car or at their office, so that when you're hungry, there's a reasonable chance that you're going to have something that will satisfy you with you.
Okay, so we're moving into this area, and we all know it, and that food, and you've described it nicely, often food isn't an immediate experience. It's a means, it's a tool, it's a self-soothing device. It's not about the food, it's about the emotional significance of the food. And so there's a whole role for many of us, and particularly perhaps for therapy clients in particular, because we're not particularly good at affect regulation. So what's this role of food, and how food gets used in such a way that this question of dieting and weight regulation and the whole thing gets away from this self-regulating experience that you've been trying to present to us and become something else?
Right. So, if you think about why people overeat, I'm focusing today on two main causes, and we've talked a lot about the deprivation. Now we're talking about the emotional use of food, and this is what, as therapists, we're much more familiar with. The reason I start with the deprivation when I'm talking to you today, but I do this with my clients as well, is that in order to solve the emotional part, we really have to first develop this internal structure. So if you ask clients, what triggers your overeating? They say I'm an emotional overeating, and you say what feelings? You'll get the whole list. I eat when I'm sad. I eat when I'm angry. I eat when I'm bored. I eat when I'm happy. And then you can ask, well, what does food do for you? And that's what you're talking about around the affect regulation. So people will use words like it soothes me, it distracts me, it numbs me, it calms me, it comforts me, it's my best friend, it's my worst enemy. If we can go to the next, okay. So I think it's really important to understand how people translate the language of feelings into the language of food. And we should keep in mind, we come into this world, food is the earliest way we're soothed. It makes sense that we would reach for food. So if you ask somebody, let's say your client tells you that she was really upset with her boss, she was really angry, and she came home and hit the refrigerator and just ate and ate and ate until she was very uncomfortably full. So it feels to her like she was angry and she ate. If you slow it down, really what happened is she was angry. She may not even realize she was angry, and she was unable to sit with those feelings. So we understand that as therapists, that idea. She was unable to be with her feelings, and she found herself in the refrigerator going for whatever food. And the minute she does that, she starts yelling at herself. And again, if you ask clients about how they talk to themselves, you'll find very harsh language. I'm bad, I'm out of control, what's the matter with me, I'm lazy, I have no willpower. And so she might start saying, boy, my stomach's too big, I'm getting so fat, nobody's going to want to be with me, I'm not going to be able to date. I'd better do something about it. I'd better go on a diet. So now we're back to the diet. As if dieting will solve the real issue, which is she was angry with her boss and didn't know how to manage those feelings. So I think as therapists, we can really understand that. But what's so important for us to keep in mind when we're sitting with the client who says, I have to lose weight, and we are tempted to buy into it, is that it's not really a diet problem or a food problem. It's a calming problem.
Okay. So people who are, this is primarily an audience of therapists who are listening to our session here, our conversation. And so the question I think many people are asking is, you've given us this a framework for understanding what attuned eating is, and some of your understanding of the science of dieting and some of these fundamental principles about what it means to be an attuned eater. So can we spend a little time here, and we have about 10 minutes left. If I'm in my practice and I'm maybe up to this point, a client is dealing with not with eating disorder, but they're struggling with weight loss issues. How do you translate what we've been doing? How does it look? How does it sound? What are the stages of this kind of work, and how does it translate into a therapeutic practice?
When people come to me, they're coming usually directly for this issue of overeating. Okay. So it may come up with your clients. They come in for another issue, and it may come up that way. I always start with empathizing with the distress they're in. When they're saying, I'm so fat, if I don't lose weight, I'm going to be ill, or whatever, I start with saying, I hear how concerned you are. I hear you're really worried about this. But what I don't do is buy into, yes, you have to lose weight tomorrow. Okay. And then as I ask them to tell me a little bit about their history with food and weight, and inevitably you hear the same story. I mean, everybody's story is unique, but you'll hear the same restriction and overeating. And that's where I start to give some of the information I've given today. Hey, did you know that 98% of diets fail? What you're describing to me is what I hear all the time. And people have the sense that, boy, and then I start to explain the steps of attuned eating. And people end up very hopeful that if I can really be in tune with my body, then there's a good chance I can stop overeating and that my weight might change. So I want to just talk for a minute about that. The other thing I say to clients is, when you're overeating and you're reaching for food to deal with emotions, you're really trying to help yourself, and that's a good thing. it's just the wrong solution. It's like rubbing ice cream on a cut. It doesn't really solve the problem. But our clients are so hard on themselves, and so it's really important to help them start changing the way they talk to themselves so that they get to the point where they say, I'm reaching for food and I'm not hungry. I wonder what I would think about or feel if I didn't eat right now. But again, in order to do that, they have to have started to build this structure we're talking about. So in the beginning, somebody may only eat out of physical hunger 5-10% of the time, and I'm looking for them to get up to 60%, 70%, 80%. If somebody's reaching for cookies, overeating cookies, you can't really be sure if it's because it's deprivation. They've told themselves cookies are bad, and now they're eating them, they're forbidden food, or if it's because something's really bothering them. So helping clients.
How do you set this up? So these are sort of the principles and the questions you have, but in terms of the structure of the work with the client. So in a first session, you might do something like what you've done with us here today. You give them information, you educate them, you make them aware of alternatives, and then in terms of how the therapy develops and how things are sequenced. Can you give us a picture of where you go then?
It really, every client's so different, of course. When I work with people both in groups and individually, and if you have a chance to do a group using using attuned eating, it's wonderful because it really helps break down the shame when you get a bunch of people in the room who are struggling with this. But as far as the individual work, each therapist is going to work with this in whatever way you help clients deal with uncomfortable feelings. What would be unique in using this work is that I make sure in each and every session I check in about their eating. Mm-hmm. I ask them to tell me some experiences during the week, and everybody wants to start with, oh my gosh, it was a bad week, I did this, I did that. Mm-hmm. And I always say, okay, we'll get to that in a minute, but first, can you tell me something that went well? Can you come up with at least one experience where you were hungry and you got what you wanted, what you were hungry for? And most people do, and it's really wonderful. They'll stop and say, oh my gosh, I forgot about it, and it felt so good. We're really helping people start, we tend to notice the negative, and we want to help move them toward the positive. And I'm really careful with clients, too, when they're using I was good, I was bad, to say what felt good and what felt bad.
Uh-huh. And so they talk about a particular meal, a particular dish.
And get detailed with your clients. What did you eat?
Okay.
Were you hungry? How did it feel in your body?
Uh-huh.
I had a burrito, but it was not the right match. What was it too heavy? What would have felt better? Oh, I think I needed, and really work with them, but get the details and guide them. And talk about the idea that every eating experience is an opportunity to learn something about yourself. Be curious. If it goes well, that's great. If it doesn't go well, fine. What can you learn from it for next time?
Mm-hmm. So it's with as you're pointing out, with food, with everything, we have all of the enormous complexity, individual differences of people. But is there, as you stand back and you look at some patterns and some regularities, so where does it, when this work goes well, so you're starting off, you've introduced people to some concepts, you're beginning to get them to have a real experience of the pleasure of eating. Tell us a little bit more about what's the process of change? So what starts to happen is that as in the beginning, like I said, I don't focus on the emotional eating. We just focus on collecting stomach hunger experiences, and people get really excited. Mm-hmm. So I had somebody recently, she came to me and said, I took my children to Potbelly. I love Potbelly. When I get in line, I always order Potbelly. And I was about to place my order, and I thought, I'm not hungry. Uh-huh. And she said, I realized if I get hungry tomorrow for Potbelly, I can come back. So people start to string more and more of those experiences together. And once they start collecting them, they see what's possible. And then they're in a really strong position to work on the emotional part of the eating. I'm reaching for food and I'm not hungry. What's really bothering me? And as people start to, if foods are no longer forbidden, they don't work well anymore to take you away from the emotion. If I can have cookies any time I want and I'm not yelling at myself for eating cookies, they don't help me move away from how disappointed I am in my spouse at the moment. So I always call this the good news and the bad news. The overeating slows down or stops, and you're left with the feelings.
Now, that's not really bad news. We, as therapists, we know that's good news because you can deal directly. But there's a good reason people are using the food to move away from painful stuff. So they really then get back to it. And a lot of times, Rich, people are already in therapy doing really great work. But the problem is that if they're in that compulsive eating cycle, every time they reach for food, they lose access to the feeling. So if they're in my group and in individual therapy, they can now deepen their work because they have better access to what's really bothering them.
So at what point in this process do you get a sense you have these early experiences, people are discovering, you're offering them something that's new for them, a different way of experiencing the pleasure of food, way to language an experience of food that many people how many of us actually do ever really find words to language the kind of sensations in this very intimate terrain of our physiology, and for the first time we're describing it. There's sort of a poetry to it, really. So, okay, so we it's a lot of, there's a creativity to that as well. At what point do people's patterns really kick in a way that they shift into something else? You begin to see something, a sustained change. How does this happen? Can you give us a flavor for the overall process with all the individual variations?
Yeah. Some people come in so ready to do this work. They've read about the non-diet approach, and in a matter of months, you see the changes. For some people, it's a much longer process because even the idea of having a need is scary. Am I entitled to be hungry? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of, just like with all of our clients in progress, there's a lot of variation, but you'll see the relief quickly. You'll see the relief around the eating quickly, and the binging, just by ending the yelling, the binging slows down very quickly. But what you're looking for is people get to the point where it no longer occurs to them to eat unless they're physically hungry, and it's very moving when that happens. And I also, one of the reasons I just love this work is that what I see is attuned eating leads to attuned living. So as people get better at noticing I have needs, my needs are very specific, my needs can be fulfilled, it starts to translate to other areas of their life. And that's really a wonderful journey to watch, to witness.
So the other thing that stands out for me about how you work and the way the underlying attitudes is that this notion about size acceptance, about this preoccupation with the taking people away from their preoccupation with the perfect body. If I can lose that 5, that 10, that 20 pounds. So how does that work its way? Because people are coming to you, they think, and I know you addressed this really early, but they're coming in, they're there, they think, and even whatever they've read of you and how much they're familiar with what your work, they think they're there to lose weight, no?
Well, I want to be clear about that. I'm always upfront with people that I'm not a weight loss program, that I help people end the preoccupation with food and weight. Mm-hmm. What happens is that, people believe, well, once I'm not overeating, surely I'll lose weight. And that's true for some people. What I'm really clear about is that if people lose weight with attuned eating, it's a side effect. It's not the main event. And again, it's really important not to turn attuned eating into the next diet. So as somebody normalizes their eating, they're eating when they're hungry, they're stopping when they're full, they're eating from a wide variety of foods, their weight's going to stabilize at whatever is natural for them, and that has to do with all the factors we talked about earlier, genetics, your history. The more you've yo-yo dieted, the higher your weight is going to be. So they're not going to really know. And I have no way up front to know what's going to happen with their weight. The incentive is that this feels so much better. They feel so much better, and they'll say to me, I could never diet again. Now, the reasons people want to lose weight are varied, but they generally have to do with, I want to be more attractive and I want to be healthy. And so I do a lot of education around that. I do a lot of work around strengthening body image, not weighing yourself, because, people use that scale. If my weight goes up, I'm depressed, it triggers overeating. If your weight goes down, you deserve a reward, it triggers overeating. But to really also understand size diversity, that even if we all ate the same and moved the same, we wouldn't weigh the same.
Mm-hmm. So when you say, go back for a moment to strengthening body image, so how does one strengthen a body image?
Okay. Well, there's a shifting paradigm. Maybe some of you have heard of it, called Health at Every Size, that is health-centered rather than weight-centered.
Appearance-centered, yeah.
I want to say weight-centered, a number on the scale, because appearance is important to all of us, and that idea that we can, a lot of times people are waiting till they lose weight to buy the clothes they want, to exercise. People put off all kinds of things. So part of strengthening... what life will begin at my target weight. Right. And so, part of being health-centered instead of weight-centered is life begins now. And what can I do to make myself healthier? Well, exercise makes us healthier. Some people exercise and lose weight. Some people exercise and they don't. But we all become healthier. Okay. And so beginning to connect with one's body, to wear clothes that feel good, that you feel comfortable in, to move beyond a number on the scale, and that's really what I want to help clients to do, is be more holistic in their thinking about what wellness is. Okay, so we began this, and we just have a few minutes. So the thing that's occurring to me is going back to where we started. So what we talked about was this really this colossal failure rate of weight loss as the weight loss industry. So in terms of this kind of work, what do we know about how do we begin to evaluate? So here we have what is becoming a kind of straw man, and the more you look at it, what could be more, as you pointed out in a very striking way at the beginning, if we thought that we went to a doctor and your success rate was 2 to 5%, would you ever use that treatment? So what do we know about the kind of attuned eating, the kinds of size acceptance, the way in which that your people are able to lead a better life and come to terms with their lives? And what is the number one? What seems is there an obstacle to this when it doesn't work for them? When people cannot seem to escape this tortured relationship with food that we've been describing as the backdrop to this whole presentation? What is it that gets in the way of embracing attuned eating and developing the kind of attitude towards food and life that you're describing? That's a big question at the end. I have a client who's been working with this for many, many, many years, and just because of some of the emotional obstacles in her life has a very hard time taking care of herself in all areas of her life. So food or exercise just become one more way that she can do it for a while but can't sustain it because of psychological factors. And it's just like with any of our clients, when, some people can embrace and some people take longer. But what I'm clear about is that going back to diets doesn't work. So even on those days when she's feeling desperate and I really need to do something, and we look at, what would that look like? And she says, I think I need to go on a diet. And I would never say to somebody, you can't see me anymore if you go on a diet. I'll be with them in the experience and what's going on for them and what happens. But even imagining it and what it would be like to go back to following rules, pretty often, she'll conclude, boy, I know that's not going to work for me. And then we go back to, what will make you feel better? And it's just a process. I think the other big question you're asking is, how do we know this works in general? And there's a lot of research. The attuned eating is also called intuitive eating. And I'd asked you earlier if I can put some stuff on the board at the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll be glad to list some resources of studies. There are many studies that compare like a traditional weight loss paradigm to the Health at Every Size, and find that even if first of all, there's a much lower attrition rate with the Health at Every Size compared to the diet, the traditional weight management programs. But even if weight doesn't change, people improve in all the physiological factors of metabolic health. And so we see positive changes. Self-esteem in the diet group, interestingly, goes up at the beginning and then goes way down, whereas in Health at Every Size group, it takes longer to build the self-esteem. It takes a year, but then it's sustained. There's a lot of research on health and weight. It may surprise people, but if there's 40-plus studies, the long-term studies that look at who lives the longest, it's people who are in the BMI category of overweight that actually live the longest. We have so
BMI
many,
meaning?
body mass index.
Okay.
We think it's common sense that you should lose weight. We have filters. We've been taught it so well that we've internalized. And sometimes when we see studies that say something different, we still can't accept that it could be true, that you could be larger and healthy. And so what I think is important for, just in the most general sense, is that there are people who are fat who are unhealthy, and there are people who are fat who are healthy, just like there are people who are thin who are healthy, but there are people who are thin who are unhealthy. And it serves all of us and all of our clients to practice healthful behaviors, eating when we're hungry, stopping when we're full, getting a good night's sleep, moving our bodies, going to the doctor on a regular basis. That's what we're talking about when we're saying let's focus on wellness when we evaluate success rather than a number on the scale that doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what's going on for a person.
Okay. So before we say, and I know there's a last message that we'll get to in a moment with Judith. So I just want to, and we've done this to those of you who've been in previous webinars, just want to make you aware what we think here at the Networker and with people who have the hundreds, even thousands of therapists who participated in these previous webinars around the world. One of the things that's really important about this mode of learning is that is participatory. Even though you're looking at a computer and seeing two people chat up here, that really the important thing is the ripple effect of these conversations and how these conversations get carried on into your practices, into the communities of practice in which you all live and work. And so the beginning of that is our comment board, and on the bottom of your screen you'll be able to see a live link to a comment board. Judith has given us an enormous amount with this extremely countercultural message that she has been delivering here and delivering so well in this presentation. What I really want to encourage you to take a moment now and to really crystallize for yourself what stood out about this, what made sense, what you have questions about, what do you disagree with, how does this apply to something in your practice, in your personal life, in your work with your clients, however it is. The more you take a few moments now before you move on into the rest of your life and just capture for yourself what stood out for you, the more you'll crystallize, the more you'll be able to distill and perhaps carry over beyond this hour into your life some of these ideas and this perspective, really, very different perspective on food and our relationship with food that Judith has delivered. She has agreed very graciously to visit our comment board. And in addition to giving us all some resources, some links to ways in which you can follow up on this particular way of looking at size acceptance and dealing with food, and so you'll have that as well. And we'll also be, as long as she's understood these. She will not be writing a book in response to anything that people put up there. More than happy to come up to our comment board. So please encourage you to do that. Judith, you have a final message for us as we bring this webinar to a conclusion?
Yes. My last slide is called Making a Difference, and one of the things I do often when I present at conferences to therapists, and also what we wrote about in the diets in Beyond a Shadow of a Diet, is really encourage therapists to explore their own attitudes and beliefs around food and around weight, because, when you think about it, we have enormous power. We're in all kinds of settings besides private practice. We're in hospitals and schools. And so what we believe about food and weight affects what we put out in the world, both in our professional lives, but in our personal lives as well. So, really become aware about how do you talk about food. Do you describe yourself as good or bad? Do you compliment somebody when they're losing weight? And, again, when I do conferences, I have a whole handout to have people explore those. But if you think about it, when you if you believe in what I'm saying, if this philosophy makes sense to you and you're someone who embraces attuned eating, this idea of using the internal cues, the idea that of embracing size diversity, we all come in different shapes and sizes, I think of it like a ripple. You throw a pebble and it creates ripples, and we all have the power to create those ripples. And so this is my ripple today, I hope, in putting it out in the world, and I'll look forward to see where it takes us.
to the mighty wave. Well,
the mighty wave.
Thank you so much. I mean, I so enjoyed your article that you wrote for us, and I found it so fresh and original, information that I just hadn't come across any other place, and expressed so clearly. And here, again, in this other medium, you've proven yourself to be a champ. So
well, thanks. And if I can give, if people want more information, there's two websites I can direct you of mine, www.dietsurvivors.com. That's a website for our book, The Diet Survivor's Handbook. I co-write with my sister, who's also a therapist. Okay. And on that list, there's a quarterly newsletter you can sign up for. So if you want to get updates every few months about what's going on. And then I also have my own website at www.judithmatz.com.
Okay. Let's see, what do we have here? There you go. So
that's the book for professionals.
That's the book, and also this other website that you have mentioned will be up on our network site, so people will be able to have a live link and click to it, and perhaps we'll also put this on the comment board. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Such an interesting presentation, a great way to launch this webinar. So thank you, Judith, and